Welcome to Single Room Training in Integration Designer. In this course, we'll focus on the core skills you need to build and program a complete single room system, devices, control, and a clean working user experience. Advanced topics like deeper interface refinement, tags, macro levels, and higher level design techniques are covered in the expert level training. For now, the goal is simple. By the end, you'll be able to program a solid single room project with confidence. Let's get going. Here we are inside Integration Designer. Let's select the File menu, and then let's create a new system. Let's navigate to where you want to store your client file, and I'll just name this Client Project. Once you start a new file, two things will happen. On the left side, a workspace will start to develop. Here you can see a global area with a placeholder for a processor, controllers, and sources. We're going to explain the global area in detail, but for now, it's an area where shared resources go. Now, our first order of business is to satisfy the Add Workspace item. I want you to think of the Add Workspace item as the aisles in the shopping cart. And as you navigate through the different aisles, you add items to your shopping cart or the workspace. Our first order of business using the Add Workspace item, which is more like a wizard, is to add a main processor. So obviously you can see that processors come in all different shapes and sizes and form factors, but we're going to go with the XP63 in this case. Now I usually like to give my processor a name, and since we're programming a single room system, I'll call this XP3 Media Room, and I'm going to select Add Processor. There you see the processor in the workspace, also known as the system tree, added to that global area. Now all of a sudden, all the tabs on the Add Workspace item will be exposed, and you'll see different tabs. Our next order of business? To add the rooms or room to our project. Now we only have one room, and since you have to have at least one room in the software, I'm going to add a room. You could search for rooms, you could scroll down and look for a room, or type in a room name. You could also set your library to English Commercial or English Residential. So whatever option you prefer, the software will remember. I'm just going to type in the name of the room in the bottom. I'm just going to call it Media Room. And I'm going to select Add Room. Now in the workspace, we have a media room also with a little placeholder for controllers and sources as well. Now I'm going to add RTI controllers. RTI controllers, just so you know, are anything with a controller or user interface. Phones, tablets, keypads, handheld remotes, those are all examples of RTI controllers. And since we only have one controller in the project, I'm going to search for the Intelligent Surface remotes. We have the ISR2, which is a 2.8-inch Wi-Fi color touchscreen. We have the 4, which is a 4-inch color touchscreen. That eliminates the keypad, which the ISR2 has, and the ISR-AB. That's an optional base station. It's also a scene controller, and also can be used as a wireless or wired access point for your RTI remotes. I'm just going to go and add the ISR4, and now instead of selecting the global area where multi-room controllers go, I'm going to select the media room, and then select Next. Now here comes some of the auto configuration features of the software at play. And the first thing the software will ask you is what template you want to use. We have two templates, one on the way, but I recommend using Coral since it's going to give you the most functionality and the most ease of use. So I'm going to select Coral. Now, in addition to selecting Coral, you're going to select what kind of a menu system do you want to use for your sources on your controller. There's two options, list menus and button menus. List menus are text-based menus that are automatically generated for you. You really don't have to do any work on the actual user interface. Button menus, on the other hand, give you some arbitrary buttons that you could customize with your own text and icons. If you don't like the buttons we give you, you could even use any other button that you create on your own. So that gives you a little more flexibility, and it's not as easy as list menus, but more custom capability. I'll go with button menus in this case, so I can show you how to use that. Now on the bottom here, I want to give my controller a more specific name. Since its job is to control the media room, and the media room only, let's call this ISR4 media room. Now since the configuration is going to include an automatic weather driver and an automatic home start page in our media room, what it's asking us here is if we want the software to create an actual weather page on the weather source and also create a home page on the home source. So the controller has a landing page where it could select the activities. I'm going to take the controller up on that kind offer, and I'm going to select Add Device. Great! We've added our controller. Now, if you have other controllers you want to add, you would either add it to the media room, and if you want to add a controller like an iPhone or an iPad, those tend to be put in global. Because if you add rooms later, those can be multi-room controllers. The ISR4 is not really capable of selecting multiple rooms. But enough of that now, let's move on. Now the next 6 tabs, drivers, Z-Wave, infrared, RS-232, page sets, and bundles, are dedicated to add source devices to your workspace or to your project. Now drivers, we're going to prefer drivers all the time because drivers are special modules that our talented driver engineers or third-party engineers went ahead and built these special modules with their skills using JavaScript, Python, C++, or whatever skill they have using the API from the manufacturer. Now this API not only lists the protocol, but all the communication needed to talk and speak to the device. So drivers have special advantages. Many of you know what these are, but you're going to get more comprehensive control. You're going to get feedback, two-way feedback. Let's face it, that's really important on certain devices. If you're using music, lighting control, or temperature control, you're going to want to have two-way feedback. It's going to make life a lot easier. Also, another great benefit of drivers is that you can control these devices with IP control or two-way serial control. That's a more reliable connection than running an emitter or talking to the device directly through the remote. So I'm going to always gravitate towards drivers if possible, but we'll show you some other methods as well. Now, we also have Z-Wave. Z-Wave allows you to control all those Z-Wave devices that are out there in the market. They're inexpensive, and they do some pretty cool things, like motion sensors, door locks, some inexpensive lighting control. Now, if you want to use Z-Wave, you need to use a compatible hub. RTI supports the ESLO plus Smart Home Hub, or third-party, you can use devices like Fabaro. We also had the ZW9, but that's been discontinued. So Z-Wave, we're not really going to cover that in this course, so we'll move on to infrared. Now, infrared is an infrared database. You'll need to either send a command from the remote directly, which I don't really recommend because people can walk in front of the signal, or you could miss the signal, or you could put an emitter from the processor to the IR window of the device. And that's going to give you a more powerful control option. Now, our IR database is built into the software, and we update this database on every software release. It's going to be complete and accurate and consolidated, and it's going to have everything you need. However, if you need to use your own IR codes, you can toggle the library from system to your own database that you either learned in using the included IR library manager. Now, also available in the IR code set is if you select a device, you'll see a preview of the code set on the right side here. So I can see all the underlying codes within the code set. You can see that these codes are very consistently named. That's so that the auto-programming process works efficiently. Now, we also have a one-way serial database. It's also very accurate, consolidated, complete. We update this often as well. Now, why would you use a one-way serial database? Well, maybe you don't have a driver, and maybe you prefer more comprehensive control. Some devices are going to give you the more control options, and so that's a good secondary means of support. If we don't have a driver and you don't want to use IR because it doesn't have a lot of command codes, RS-232 one-way is a good way to fall back. Okay? Not often used, but completely valuable. Now, page sets. A lot of people get confused with page sets, but these are like any other source, just like a cable box, Blu-ray player, or music streamer, except these sources are designed with pages that aren't backed by a specific manufacturer control codes. And these page sets are going to give you the ability to create pages quickly. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say you're programming a camera surveillance system, and you just want to give your client some thumbnails on his user interface. Well, usually you'll have to create those from scratch. You'll have to add an arbitrary source device and then create those thumbnails. If you use the camera multi-view page set, if you add that, you'll get the source device and the underlying pages all in one kit and caboodle. All you have to do is enter in the URLs and you're done. We also have an intercom page, lighting pages, a please wait page. So these are all designed to give you a head start without having to create these from scratch. Again, they're not going to be backed by any manufacturer device, but they're certainly going to give you a user interface that you could either program your own codes or use the built-in codes that are included, like for the intercom or the camera. Now, you could also add a blank page set, and I like to call that anything source. So if you want to give your client a welcome page, or if you want to give him a scene source, and when he selects it, he can go and access some scenes in the home or business, a blank page set is kind of like a generic source. So you would add that. Now also we have bundles. Now bundles are a great feature for your business because when you go and design an interface for a particular source, let's pretend a cable box. You add all your channel favorites, you customize the look and feel and programming, and now you could export that as a bundle. It will export the entire library, all the graphics, and all the functionality that you work so hard on, and it will preserve it in a bundle. And now, the next time you add that device, whether it's in another room in your closet, in your project, or another project you're beginning, you'll add the bundle instead of adding the regular device from these other tabs. And that will preserve the work you've already done. You can see I have a couple of bundles here. Nothing too crazy, but I imagine you'll create a lot of bundles for your business. Now I'm going to start with the driver tab, and I'm going to add the first source to my media room, which is going to be the display. Now I could go to the search box here and type in what I'm looking for. Now keep in mind that the library currently is set to system. If you want to use your own drivers that are not in the driver store, you could toggle this to user. Now the software will look in a certain directory for any drivers you've either downloaded or created yourself. And we'll show you how to do that a little later on. But for now, I'm going to use the built-in system library, which consists of all the RTI certified drivers that are in our driver store. Now, a couple of things about drivers. On the right side here, you're going to see some information, like the author, the last time it was modified, the name of the manufacturer and model, and version. But what's really important is that you can access the files, but what I'm looking for is more information. These are the important integration notes on the product or driver you've selected. It's really important to read these integration notes so you can understand how to program and set up the driver for success. So make sure you read the integration notes for whatever driver you're using. Also, make sure you're very familiar with the device you're programming. If it's a complex device like a DSP or something complex and complicated, you're going to want to get the appropriate training so the driver notes make sense. Probably a good idea to also bench test it if it's complicated in advance so you know exactly what you're getting. All right, enough of that. Let's click OK. We're going to be adding a display to our project file. So in the driver tab, I'm going to search for my first display, which is a Sony Google TV. So I'm going to just type in some search criteria, and hopefully I get my Sony Bravia with Google. I'm just going to type in the word Google, and there's my driver. So I'm going to select my driver. Of course, I'm going to read my driver notes. I could also access the driver store directly. So if I click this link here, it will pop up the driver store for me, albeit in a separate window. So here's the driver store setting that we'll go to. You can download the driver, read the instructions here. You could even rate the driver if you're logged in. Okay, so we're going to add that Sony Google to the media room. I'm going to select next, and now here comes some of the driver features in play, okay? This is going to help you get a head start in your system by auto-building some of these things for you. Now, the first thing it's going to ask you is, would you like me to make the TV your room's audio source? What does that mean? What that means is, if you leave that ticked, it will take the volume up, down, and mute commands and punch them through to the rest of the sources in the media room. Not a bad offer, okay? So it's a glorified punch through. Now, if you want to do that, you'll leave that ticked. However, I'm going to use a receiver in this room, so I'm going to untick that. I don't want to use my TV as the room's audio source. Now, we're about to add a source name. I'll type in this source name to be a little more user-friendly so I can identify it easier. I'll call it TV Media Room. Now, what this check mark means is, right now we're about to add a source and a driver. The driver will appear in the workspace under the driver tab. And that's where we configure the driver. We set it, the IP address, or whatever we have to do. Now, it'll also create another play entry under sources for the same device. That's where all the pages go for that source. So we're going to want to keep those names consistent. So I'll leave that ticked. Use the source name for the driver. It should really say, make the driver and source name the same name. And I'll put in a user-friendly name. Now, normally, I like to give my clients smart TVs, but I am using a Roku Ultra in this project, so I'm going to untick the page creation. If I do leave this ticked, it will create a TV interface on my remote under that source that we created. However, if I untick that, it won't. We could always add it later pretty easily, let me add, but I don't want to create a user interface for my TV, okay? And if I want to later on, it's really simple. So let's add the device minus any pages. We'll get the entire code set. Fantastic. Now you'll see that the device, the source is here, and that's where the source pages belong. And under the driver tab, you could see that the TV Media Room driver is here. That's where we make the configuration options and access all the other cool things you could do with a driver, such as driver events and other things. All right, let's move on to our receiver in AVR. Now, I'm going to go with a Denon AVR. So I'm going to type in Denon space AVR. Now again, you see this plus sign, and you also see that this receiver supports Marantz as well. Not uncommon for a protocol to support multiple manufacturers, especially since they're under one umbrella and company. So let's open up the plus sign. Now what this is saying is that this single driver can control up to 4 zones of that AVR. We all know that AVRs these days are packed with zone options, right? Your Yamaha has 4 different zones. It's almost like having 4 receivers packed into one. And so zone 1 could be in one room, zone 2 can be in another. I'm just going to add the main zone or zone 1 to the media room. Now these other devices, I would say here, are if you want to add a user interface for a specific function on the receiver. You're going to have to add zone 1. That's no question. But in addition to zone 1, to the same room, you'll either add AM/FM tuner, HD tuner, Sirius XM, and so on and so forth. That way you'll get a user interface for that particular service. We don't want to add all the services and assume you would just want them all. So you add one at a time, depending on what you want. I'm just going to add zone 1 to the media room and select next. Now, I will set this as my room audio source. I will punch the volume through to all the sources I've added already and add in the future. That way, when the client presses volume up, it volumes up the receiver and no other devices. Okay? And I will use the source name for the driver since I'm only entering one zone. And I'm going to call this AVR Media Room. Nice and simple. Okay? Again, user interface, not a good idea. It's a complicated piece of machinery. We don't want to generate a service call because our client accidentally pressed the wrong function. So I'm going to untick the remote so that it doesn't create a user interface. Again, if I need one later, it's simple, and we do get all the commands regardless. So let's add that device with those settings. Great. We're doing really well. Now we're ready to add the source devices that do require functionality. I'm going to clear out the search box and show you a couple of things. Let's say you did add another zone to your media room. Let's pretend you have another room which the zone 2 on that same receiver that's in the media room is supporting. Instead of adding another driver, right? Instead of searching for Denon, Marantz in the search box, and adding a new driver, sorry, this is a little slow. I have a lot of drivers here. Instead of opening this up and adding another zone, what you're going to do is go to the existing driver, add to existing driver. That's on top. And you can see here that if I open up the AVR feature here for the media room, that the zone feature is already allocated. Okay? All right. I'm going to go and add another device here. Now, usually I'll add a cable box or satellite box if I have one. Okay? I'll add a DirecTV. So I'm going to search in my search box under drivers for DirecTV. Okay? Now, when it finds the driver, it's going to give you that plus sign again, and this will imply that one driver can control up to 24 different DirecTVs in your home or business. So I'm going to add tuner 1 to the media room and select next. Now I'm going to give this a more user-friendly name, and I'll keep the driver name consistent with whatever name I put in here, and I'm going to call this Satellite Media Room. Okay? Keep it generic, but common. Now over here, yes, I would like to create a user interface on my ISR4 for the DirecTV that's mostly programmed. I could make changes to it, I could tweak it, or I could throw it away and add a new interface of my own. But yes, I want to keep that interface. Select Add Device. Now again, let's say you were adding another DirecTV. Instead of adding a tuner 1 again to the interface, on top, there'll be a section, Add to Existing Driver. And we could see here that tuner 1 is missing because it's already been allocated to the workspace. So we would add tuner 2, then that would be gone, tuner 3. But make sure you use the top function. Let me just clear out the search box under Add to Existing Driver. It'll always be on top and show you the existing instances for your drivers. All right, let's add another device. I'm going to add a Roku media streamer. Search for Roku. Okay. I don't know why it's taking so long. I apologize for the delay. In my Roku, that supports up to 16 players. I'm going to allocate player 1 to the media room. Select next and rinse and repeat. Use the source theme for the driver since I'm only using one Roku. We don't want to name the driver Media Room Roku if I'm using multiple instances. But since I am, it's fine to call both the driver and the source Roku Media Room. Now, if you untick this, it will name the source Roku Media Room, but it will name the driver simply Roku. That's if you have multiple instances. And I will add a page for it and click Add Device. Fantastic. Now, I'm going to go over to the infrared tab. I'll show you how to use those. Let's add a Sony Blu-ray. So I'm going to search for a Sony BLU. And notice how the Integration Designer software consolidates all the IR libraries. We don't break out every single model. We only break out the models that have a different code set than all others. So for example, if you're using BDP-CX, you'll use this one. If you're using BDP-SX, you'll use this one, and so on and so forth. However, all others, I'm going to use most models. And here I could preview the code set. Oh, look at that. There's a discrete power on and off. That's nice. Now, when you add this to the media room, it's going to ask you what emitter port do you want to fire out of. You could choose all ports, which I don't really recommend, a specific port, which I do recommend, or you might want to put the device in standalone. If you put a device in standalone, you will only be able to send out commands directly from the remote using the entire code set. Again, standalone is a little bit unreliable, so I'm going to specify port 1. Okay? And now, every command I set for the Blu-ray will fire out of that port. There's no more output port routing or any of that in our original Integration Designer. Okay? Now, on the bottom here, I'm going to give this a real user-friendly name. And fortunately for me, it'll also name the port for me. Let's give this a good name. We'll call it Blu-ray Media Room. If you like to type in the models, that's up to you. Okay? And we'll create a user interface for it. Now, I'm just going to pretend to add another one just to show you how this works. If you look at your ports now, the Blu-ray has been added to port 1. How nice. Okay? All right, fantastic. We're doing good. Now I'm going to add another driver. It's perfectly fine to skip around. And I'm going to add a Sonos player. Okay? So I'm going to type in Sonos. I can see that the driver supports up to 32 Sonos instances. So I'm going to go with player 1. And these could be any type of player. A Sonos port, a Sonos Connect, a Sonos Playbar, a Sonos Arc, a Sonos speaker, any kind of Sonos. Okay, so player 1, we're going to put in the media room. Click Next. And since this is going to be a Sonos port, I'm going to use the receiver volume for it, so I don't need to set this feature. Use the source theme for the driver, since I'm only using one Sonos. And let's label this Sonos Port Media Room. And I'll create a user interface. That'll save me some time and effort and make me more profitable. Let's add that device. Fantastic. Now, optionally speaking, you might want to add a device like a climate control device or something like that. Perfectly reasonable to do. I'll add a thermostat. However, when you're adding devices that are probably going to be shared throughout the project if you add more rooms later. Let's say the client calls you back and says, hey, I really love the way you did the media room. I'd like you to add more rooms for my home or business. Well, at that point, if whatever's in global can be shared from room to room. So I recommend adding devices like thermostats, shades, lighting control, or even sources that are part of a matrix switch or video over IP system, or even a simple HDMI splitter. I recommend putting those in global. When you put a source in global, that will give you the ability to have a user interface on other local room controllers. So I'm going to stick this thing in global, even though it doesn't matter for this system. Okay, I'm going to find my thermostat. This one driver controls up to 16. Thermostat 1 is going into global. Click next. Let's give this a better name. Let's call it climate control. And we'll create that UI on the ISR4. Add device. Okay. All right, I'm going to head over to the page sets now. Now, if you have one of these page sets you want to add, you'll add it. Like, for example, maybe the client uses a video game in the media room. Okay. Well, you would add a video game in use. That will add a source with a video game icon that says, hey, you're in video game mode. I can't control it, but you're now in video game mode. So that's something you can do. In my example, I'm just going to add a please wait source with a page to the project. Okay? That way I could have a please wait page. Completely optional, but I wanted to show you an example of a page set. So let's select the media room, select next, and let's leave the name as is, leave the page ticked, and select add device. Fantastic. That's pretty much it for now. I'm going to click close. Now, if you ever need to get back to the add workspace item to add additional sources, you're going to click the button over here, add workspace item. There's a few ways to get back to this, but that's the best way to do it. That way you can go on a guided tour and think of these like shopping aisles and think of your workspace as your shopping cart. And you're just going to scroll through and add the devices or products to your shopping cart. It's that simple. I'm going to click close. Now, when you're creating a project, after you've completed the workspace, you have a couple of options in the workspace. First, you can compress it all, or I could open up certain parts of it. I like to, at this point, expand all. That way my entire workspace is exposed. There's nothing hiding or nothing that I can't see. Because the next step is to survey the workspace and check out everything to make sure it looks good. You could start from the top and work your way down. I have an XP3 processor. I've got no controllers in the global area, meaning I don't have any multi-room controllers, but that's fine since I only have one room now. Okay? Here are my drivers. These don't mean they're in global. This is just where we put all the drivers. And this is where you configure your drivers. We'll do that next. Okay? Now, under the sources in global, what these sources mean is that not only can the media room access it, but if I added other rooms later on at one point, next week, next month, next year, they would also have access to these sources. And these are going to be typical sources that would be shared, like a climate control and the weather. The home page is just for the global controllers, and right now we don't have any, so that won't have a page on it. Okay? Now, under the media room, we have a local controller, an ISR4, and that implies that that controller only controls the media room. And if I add another room, it won't be able to control that other room. Otherwise, I'd put it in global. Okay? And under the local sources in the media room, here they are. And you could see by naming these systematically, accurately, and coherently, you'll be able to tell exactly what they are, what they do, and what their function serves. Notice that these are local sources, and over here, these are global sources. Local sources can only be controlled by multi-room controllers and the local controller in the room itself, not other local controllers in the other rooms. Not that we have that. Okay, so once we survey the workspace, let's say we type something in wrong. Maybe we typed in something wrong. I could right-click, rename it, and I could type in a better name. Okay? I'm going to click cancel. I could also do other things like go and delete something. Maybe I added this Roku to the wrong position, wrong place. Maybe this should be a shared source because I intend to add other rooms later on with other local controllers. Well, you could delete it and add it again. No harm and no foul. Okay? So you could reorder the sources, not that it matters, but if you want to, I could move the home page up here, I could move the Blu-ray down here, move the please wait page to the bottom, and stuff like that. You could do that stuff. The order of these pages and sources don't matter, okay? That's not how you deliver the client interface. Once you master how to build a proper workspace, the battle is already won. That's a very important step in programming your system. Okay? Now, the next step in our evolution, and I know we're dying to get to the pages, but we're not going to look at those yet, because the next step in our evolution is to program our project properties, the overall project properties. Now, we don't call it project properties, we call it system properties. And if you click File and click System Properties, well, there's the overall project properties. I'm going to skip over the stuff that's less important for a basic training and things that aren't really needed in this system at all. I'm going to skip over Zone. I'm going to move to the RTI panel. Now, if you are using apps like iOS or Android phones or tablets, even virtual panels, you can use remote access. We no longer have licenses, and we still probably need to remove this section, but it's still here. But you don't need to add any licenses. But if you're using remote access, there's 3 different ways. First, you could disable remote access altogether. That's important for projects that don't need remote access or don't want you to go outside the network, commercial projects and things like that. Processor port forwarding. If you use processor port forwarding, you need to enter in a static IP address. If your client has one of those, you'll enter it in, or a DNS account, and then you'll have to port forward 4110 to whatever IP address of the processor. So a little more work there. I recommend use RTI Cloud Access, and that's it. You don't have to do any port forwarding. You don't have to worry about setting static addresses or anything like that. You're done. So those are the 3 remote access options. Okay? Now down on the bottom here, I would use the generate new system encryption code as directed by tech support. Under store RTI panel files on the cloud. In the past, all of those files that you stored on the RTI apps, like the iOS and Android phones and tablets, they would store all those graphics on the processor, since it wasn't really possible to upload the actual iPad or iPhone or Android phone or tablet. Now, if you leave that ticked, we will store those RTI panel files for you in the cloud, alleviating some of the pressure on the processor. Pretty cool feature. That's why it's checked by default. So I would leave those checked if you can. Now, under dealer information, that's you. You're going to enter in all the information about you and the company. So go and enter in those fields. There's also a notes section. There's no shortage of note sections in this software. Under client information, that's your client. There's also room to enter in your builder, GC, or interior designer. Also another notes section. So you're going to want to enter that in if you want to track that information, which isn't a bad idea. Okay, now we'll move on to the important stuff, location. Now the processor will allow you to enter in a country. Let me set the United States. And if you're lucky enough to have your city and state shown in this list, or country and city, well, you could enter that in using this drop-down menu. However, if you really want more, if your city and state doesn't come in here, or country and city doesn't come in here, you could put in a latitude and longitude. Now, where do you get that? There's a couple of websites. When you plug in an address, it'll give you your longitude and latitude. And that will give you a specific location. Really important for processor-based events, since the processor includes an astronomical clock. Under clock, you'll put in your time zone, and we have every time zone in the world. So put in your time zone, so not only your events run on time, but your processor can display the right time on a project file or a controller. Okay? So you'll put in your time zone. I'll leave it on Eastern for now. You could automatically adjust for daylight savings if you live in a location that observes daylight savings. You could also set your clock from the PC when downloading and enable that NTP synchronization, which is the network-based time clock. Now, under the 802.11 field, if you're using controllers that require a Wi-Fi network, you're going to want to enter that in here. And we do happen to have a Wi-Fi based controller. You're going to keep these enabled, and you're going to select Add, and you're going to enter in information on your network, the name of the network, the authentication type. The encryption is set to AES, and your network key. That's your password, right? And then click OK. Now, all of this information, the location, clock, 802.11, will filter down to all of the devices in the workspace, like the processor and ISR4 that need it. So you don't have to enter that in over and over again. Let's click OK. Fantastic. Now that we've configured the overall processor properties, it's now time to configure the workspace properties. And what that means is everything in the workspace that requires a property configuration. The main processor, drivers, and RTI controllers. So let's do it. Let's start from the processor. Now the processor has a lot of tabs as well. Click on the processor, then click on Properties in the Processor Configuration section. Okay. The first tab, well, you'll see some options here. You can preserve the flag state, relay, and output state on downloads, so it remembers or not if you set a flag or clear a flag or opened the relay or closed it. So I recommend ticking that, okay, just by habit. You could set a wired network address or leave it on DHCP and reserve the MAC address. It's up to you how you want to roll. Either option is perfect. If you're doing a commercial site, you might want to enter in the static directly into the processor. Okay. Also, the clock, the location, these are going to get the information from the system properties, unless for some crazy reason you untick that. Now, under port names, here you can see the port names for our processor. First, the infrared multi-purpose I/O ports, because they are capable of other things other than IR. You could see that the Blu-ray has already been named for us. But if you have to make a cosmetic change, maybe you want to put the name of the Blu-ray in there, the manufacturer, you could go and make the cosmetic name. This will not impact port routing. It will only impact the name of the port. But over here, you could make, if you're using relays, you could name your relays accordingly. Maybe you're using a garage. Maybe you're using a curtain. So you'll enter those in because the system won't name those for you. It only names the IR. Also, RS-232 ports. If you're using an RS-232 port, using a driver or anything else, you have to enter that in yourself. The processor will only name the IR MPIO ports, and the same thing with the sense ports as well. Those are good for sensing a contact closure. Okay? All right. Relay mode will set your relays to normally open or closed, so consult your documentation for that, and we'll go over flag names in a more deeper training, and you can see there's a notes section. Let's click OK. Now, with drivers, configuring your driver properties is absolutely 100% essential. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to communicate with them. Now, all these drivers, if I click on the first driver and then click on driver properties, these all have very different driver properties from driver to driver to driver. If you're not sure how to configure it, again, you're going to want to click on driver info. Okay, you notice that you also can access the driver store, and for convenience, we always include the files within the Integration Designer install. So you have them here for you as well. You don't have to go out to the driver store to get them. Okay, so I'm going to go and configure this using some fake settings, of course. I could use TCP or serial. I'll leave it on TCP for now. And I could use either the friendly name or a static IP address, which I'll use, and I'll just enter in a static IP address. And there we go. The ports are always going to match the API. We do give you the ability to change it, but 9 out of 10 says you don't need to. Okay? And that's that. Okay? Let's move on to the next one, the climate control. Now, there's a couple of things you need to do here. You need to authorize the Echo Bee. We're not here to learn Echo Bee for now, but you would just go give your thermostat a name. I'll just call this main floor T-stat, and you'd have to authorize it, specify how many remote sensors you have, and so on and so forth. For the Roku in the media room, you could either use the serial number or the IP address. I'll use the IP address in this case. Let's name the Roku, so our macros are named Roku Media Room instead of Roku 0. And let's put in the IP address of the Roku. Now, under these fixed channels, these used to be important before you could launch channels by names. So you would save these channels like presets on a car radio. We're going to skip over this. We don't need to use this. Okay? Under satellite, with your DirecTV, you're going to want to name your DirecTV. Again, so your macros don't say Tuner 1. Instead, it will say DirecTV Media Room. And that's also useful if you've got a bunch of instances in here. Tuner 1, and there'll be Tuner 2 with the same options in here. Whether or not your device is standard or a client, mine's a standard. The IP address of the device, and whether or not you want receiver feedback. Why not? Okay? Let's move on to the Sonos. Now the Sonos, after we give it a name, you're going to want to enter in a serial number for your Sonos. If you're not sure how to get there, look at the bottom here where it tells you that it's in About My Sonos. So you'll go and enter that in. Usually it's 13 digits. Usually they're separated by colons. I'll just enter in some fake information there. Okay? There's also a bunch of other stuff in here. I'm not here to teach the Sonos driver. We'll have a separate tutorial for that, but you could enable some special options. If you don't touch these, it'll work fine right out of the box. And I recommend doing that, at least for the first run. For the TV in the media room, at least the Sony Google TV, all you got to do is enter in an IP address. So I'll enter in 204. Okay? The port should be perfect. For the weather driver, you're going to want to enter in your location. Now, if you drill down to the bottom here, it'll say you can enter in your zip code, city, comma, country, latitude, comma, longitude. So you pick your poison. I'm going to put in a zip code. I'll just put in 55379. Okay? But you could put in whatever zip code you're located in or your client is located in. And that's the drivers. Now, I do have one more thing to configure, the ISR4 controller. Let's click that, okay? And you're noticing that whatever you click on in the workspace, the window to the right will give you that configuration and give you all the settings and options. So let's click Properties in the ISR4 Media Room Controller configuration. Now, in the General tab, this irks me a lot. You're going to want to set a better power down time. Otherwise, this thing's going to time out every 10 seconds. I usually make mine about 45 seconds. That will eat up a little bit of battery life, not enough to make a real difference. Whether or not you want to enable the tilt switch, if you've added an ISR-AB, you'll select it from the drop-down here. And let's move on to backlight. You have backlight settings, so you can configure these for normal and dark conditions. You could disable the ambient light sensor if you choose to do so. Sound effects. Maybe you want to add a sound effect to the remote. We give you a few, and we'll give you a little preview of these. And so you could add a sound. And now that you added a sound, you can play this from a macro, well, at least when you're using this controller. That way you can give your client some sounds. Maybe they're visually impaired or they want to have that audible confirmation. And you could preview here too. Under wireless network. Now, if you want to set a static IP wireless network for your device, this is where you would enter it. Okay? Under 802.11, it will inherit the Wi-Fi settings from the actual system properties. Now, if you are using the ISREB as a dedicated access point, you will need to change these. However, we're not going to go over this in this training. Okay? Clock will come from the system properties, and the rest are fine the way they are. Let's click OK. Now, once you've configured your system properties and workspace properties, we're ready to move on to the next step, which is, believe it or not, configuring and programming System Manager activities. Let's move on to that next. System Manager. That's a word we haven't heard up till now. Let me explain what System Manager is. Now, Integration Designer 11, unlike other versions of the software, has built-in intelligence. Okay, starting with Integration Designer 11. Now, Integration Designer has a built-in intelligence called System Manager. And System Manager is going to do a lot of things for you that are automatically built into software. It's going to provide special feedback that tells you what room is selected, what room is not selected. It's going to give you special menus. We already kind of looked at button and list menus when we added the controller to the software. It's going to also give you special tracking variables. For example, it can tell you if a room is selected or not selected and act on it. It can also tell you if a room is on or off and act on it. It can also tell you if video or audio is on or off in a room and act on it. It can tell you things like a source is in use and many other little things. And these can be used to create some really powerful interfaces. Okay? Now, System Manager out of the box is just like a computer. It doesn't know anything. It's up to you to configure it. And that's what we're going to do next. Now, in order to configure System Manager activities, you're going to select the first room in the software, and that is the media room. The global area is not a room. It's a common area where shared resources go. Think of it as a place where all the rooms in your project can reach items, okay? Instead of placing an item in a specific room, putting it in global area will allow every room to kind of reach it, okay? But we're going to select the media room, and in the room configuration window, we're going to select activities. Now, what you're going to see is kind of like an Excel grid, like a spreadsheet. And there's many columns here, 4 or 5 columns that you're going to configure. And configuring these columns is, believe it or not, going to make System Manager a lot more intelligent. I'm going to explain each column. Now, all of the commands and, the activities and source devices available for us in this room are shown in this list. So if we added another room and we put local sources in that room, we're not going to see those. We're only going to see the shared sources in global and any source we placed in the media room. Okay? All right, now the first column, enable. What does that mean and why are some options ticked? Well, the software is going to try to take a best guess at which ones of these devices are actual activities and which are not activities. We only need them for the commands. What is an activity in the software? Let me define it for you. An activity is basically a function that performs a set of instructions to the controller that makes it jump to a page. Now, along the way, it may or may not configure some options along the way. For example, a cable activity, well, that would configure the TV, the receiver, and even the cable box along the way. A lighting or shades or climate activity, well, that will just jump to the actual page and not necessarily configure anything, right? So activities can either jump to a source page or they can actually configure something along the way. And our job here is to basically check whatever is an activity and untick whatever is not an activity. So is the weather page an activity? Is that weather page that we include on all these controllers an actual activity? If you want to give your client access to this page in order to get to it, yes, it is an activity. So we will leave that checked. Okay? What about the TV in the media room? Normally, if you're giving your client smart TV functions or the ability to actually go to a TV interface to either configure it or access functions, that would need to be an activity. But since we didn't give the client any pages when we added the TV, that is not an activity. So let's untick it. Okay? What about the satellite, Roku, and Blu-ray? Are those activities? Absolutely. They're textbook activities. And not only are they going to jump to the underlying page that's been built for us, but they're also going to configure some things along the way. What things? Well, that's up to you. But they are activities and should be checked. What about the Sonos port? Well, that's a different type of activity, but still nonetheless an activity. What about the climate? If you want to give your client access to the climate page, that is definitely an activity. And even though you're not configuring anything along the way, you're still jumping to a page where you can adjust set points or at least read the current temperature. So yes, an activity. What about the home pages? Well, one is for the global area. You can see here it says global, and that's a landing page or a home page for multi-room controllers. We don't have any, so it's not an activity. If we had an iPad or iPhone or Android device up in the global area, or even a keypad, we would activate the global homepage as well. What about the media room homepage? Well, if you want to give your client the ability to jump to a homepage on the ISR4, you definitely want to check that. What about the AVR? Well, I'd love to make it an activity, but there's no pages. I could create pages later and make it an activity, but I don't want to give my client an activity for that. I just want this to be a source device and use it for the functions only. What about the please wait page? I'm jumping to it, aren't I? Yes, I am, but it's not really an activity because it's only a temporary destination on the way to the actual source device. So those are my activities, whatever's checked. Okay? Now, the second thing you need to do is tell the software what type of source these are. There are 3 different source types. There are a video source type. We all know what those are. They usually require a display, projector, or some type of video. There's also audio devices. We all know what those are too, typically music-based device or listen type of an activity. And other, those are all else. Typically, those are the activities that don't configure anything along the way. Maybe you want to jump to your lighting scene page or jump to your climate page or your home page. Those are called other activities. Now, our job is to go through these and make sure that the software designated these as the right activity names. Is the weather other? Absolutely. It's not video and not audio, so it must be other. What about satellite, Roku, and Blu-ray? All video activities. A TV is definitely required, at least in our case. What about the Sonos? Well, audio, and the software classified it correctly. Now, even though the software will guess many of these correctly, it's still a great idea to go and make sure that it did correctly. What about the climate control on the homepage? Both other source types. Okay? Now the software knows the difference between a video source, an audio source, and an other source type. And believe me, there are a lot of benefits to that. Now over here on the left side, over here is where you can optionally change the name of your activities. Now, if you're using button menus, it's not really necessary because you're going to actually configure the names of the buttons yourself on the user interface. But if you're using list menus, this activity name is what's going to define your list menu. So for your satellite receiver activity, it's going to say satellite media room. Now, I recommend doing this exercise even if you don't have list menus, because if you add a list menu later, you don't have to come back here and reconfigure this. So I like to name these very user-friendly, like Watch DirecTV. For the Roku, Watch Roku. Client already knows what room he's in. Watch Blu-ray. My client doesn't know what a Sonos port is, so I'm going to call this listen to music. Climate's okay and home's okay. Now, if you could also drive what the list menu displays, you could also drive the order in which it shows these activities. And I recommend doing these also, okay? I usually like to have the home page on top, put the weather on the bottom using these move up and move down buttons here. Then I like the video activities in the order in which the client uses them, then audio, then in the other in the order in which the client uses them. Don't worry about anything that's not checked. Your only concern is the one that's checked. Now these are named properly, they're sorted properly, and if I add a controller with a list menu next week, next month, next year, I don't have to come back here. We're now ready to program our macros. Now, a couple of things I want to do. I want to pull this window up, and you can pull windows up by just navigating to the top until you see that frame handle, then hold down your left mouse and just bring that up. Now I'm going to click on the first video activity. Now Integration Designer revolutionizes the way macros are programmed. Number one, macros are now centralized in one location. Gone are the days where you'd have to program your ISR4, then your ISR2, then your keypad, then your kid's iPhone, then your iPhone, then your wife's iPhone. No longer have to do that anymore. Now, all the macros are centralized in one location. We've also changed how macros are created. Instead of having one button that says, go to please wait, turn on TV, turn on receiver, turn on the source device, switch inputs, then jump to the page, we made them go into special buckets. There's lots of reasons why we have these buckets. There are two types of buckets. There's events called selection events and deselection events. The buckets under selection events run when you select the specific activity. In this case, watch DirecTV. The deselection events run in order when you select the room off function on the interface automatically, right? So why did we bucket these macros? And what does this mean? Well, we did it for a couple of reasons. The first reason why we did it, many people out there aren't really familiar with macro theory and how to program an effective macro. So this takes the thought process away because each bucket has very specific and rigid requirements, okay? Number two, a lot of times when you're programming these macros, you're programming the same part of the macro over and over again. For example, for the satellite, for the Roku, for the Blu-ray, all three need to turn on a TV, send a delay, turn on a receiver, send a delay. Why do you have to program it over and over again? So a lot of these, once you program it once, will feed through to the rest of the macros. The one responsible for turning on the TV only needs to be used once on the video-like sources. Okay? So we save you some time there. Now, my favorite reason why we did this way is that System Manager has an internal tracking system. For example, the macro selection event that's responsible for turning on the TV is only going to run when the TV is off, not when the TV is already on. So if you've got a projector with a 30-second delay, it's not going to send that projector power on and 32-second delay every time you select a video activity. Okay? Now, fortunately for us, each of these selection events has a little yellow sticky on the bottom. And these little yellow stickies are kind of like notes that tell us exactly what we need to do for that bucket. And they're going to give you three essential pieces of information. Number one, when does the macro run? When does this selection event run? Number two, what is it used for? What do I have to program on it? And number three, how often do I need to program it on all the activities in the room? Either all the activities, all the video activities, all the audio activities, or just plain all. Okay? So Let's read this closely. The first thing it's going to do when you select, and I skipped over the home page on purpose. Those are automatically programmed for you. That is other source types. So I'm going to go to the first video source. And I'm going to select Activity Start, which is the first selection event that's going to run when I select Watch DirecTV. And the sticky says, when do I run? This macro's run whenever an activity is selected before anything else is done. What do I need to program on this? Use this to send the controller to a please wait page. How often do I need to program it? Well, it's common to all activities in the room, so apparently once. It'll feed through to the rest. So I'm going to program a please wait page here. Now, if you don't have a please wait page, skip it and move on to the next selection event. But I happen to have a please wait page, and I'm going to program it here. So I'm going to click on my macro steps in my tab menu here. There's a bunch of tabs in this tab menu. Make sure you select macro steps. Okay? Now there's lots of different weapons and tools here that you could use to build your macros, solve problems, or do some really cool things. I'm going to go for the page link macro step. That's going to allow me to jump anywhere in the interface I want. And I'm going to double click it or drag and drop it, and it will bring in that page link. Now in the brackets, it says select a device you want to jump to. Not really a device so much, but in the dropdown, I'm going to select the please wait source. Now notice next to it, it says calling controller. We're used to probably hard-coded controllers. Those days are gone. Now, whatever controller is running this centralized macro, whether it's an iPhone, an iPad, or the centralized ISR4, or the local, I should say, ISR4, it's going to run, it's going to jump to its own please wait page. So whatever controller is calling this macro, jump to your own respective please wait page. And that's the way it runs throughout. This isn't exclusive to the ISR4. This will work with whatever controllers we decide to add to the system. Let's move on to the next function. That was pretty simple. When does this next one, room on, run? It's run, now listen closely, when an audio or video source is selected and the room is currently off. So we know this is going to run regardless of whether I select an audio or video source, but it will only run when the room is off. Now, what is this used for? Well, it's used for those devices that need to be turned on regardless of whether I select audio or video. You know those devices you have in your rooms that need to turn on for both audio and video. Now, if you don't have a device that meets this criteria, move on. But if you have a device that has to turn on regardless, in this case, of whether I select the satellite, Roku, Blu-ray, or Sonos, this is where you'll turn it on. And it even tells you, like an AV receiver. Okay? And it's common to all activities in the room. So I'm going to bring in my receiver power on, since it needs to turn on when the room is off, regardless of whether I select audio or video. So I'm going to bring in this command, this top function. Just double click it. Then in the drop-down menu, you're going to select your device, the AVR. You're going to select your function. Usually the power on stuff is all the way up top. Main zone, on, off. And then for the argument, you're going to select on. Now sometimes AVRs require a brief delay, and just in case, the next macro step below command will give you a little brief time delay. Double click it. 30 seconds, that's a little out of control. It remembers your last one. I'm going to set this to probably 1.5 seconds. IP devices are quick. I don't even think I need a delay. And I'm done. What happens after it runs that? Video on. And it says, this macro's run only when a video source is selected and the room is not currently on a video source. Well, if the room is not currently on a video source, what could it possibly be doing? Well, it could be either off or it could be listening to audio. And as you would probably guess, this turns on only video-specific equipment, like a display or projector. And it's common to all video activities in a room. You program it once, you don't have to program it again. So I'm going to double-click command. I'm going to turn on my TV. select my TV. And then for your function, again, these are usually towards the top, the general functions, power on. Now, if your TV needs a delay, bring in a time delay, and I'll set this to a greater delay, like 3 seconds, okay? But you'll set it to whatever delay your TV needs, okay? Now, we're ready to power on the underlying source responsible for the activity. Now, let's read this closely. This macro is run when the first room in the system begins using the source. This isn't a shared source because it's in the local media room. But if it were, only the first room can turn it on, and I'm skipping ahead, but only the last room can turn it off. This is some of the power of System Manager, okay? So it says you could use this to power on the source, and it's common to all rooms that share the source, meaning the media room. So I'm going to go to my commands again, and I'm going to select my DirecTV or satellite from the dropdown. Now this is really weird. There's a function called device state keys on top. We try to keep it as close to the API as possible. So I'm going to select that. And now from the dropdown, I'm going to select my DirecTV. That's why we named it in the driver. And instead of toggling it, I'm going to select on. And of course, we give you some press and release. Press and release will work fine. Okay? Now I turned on my DirecTV. What about the next one, activity selected? It says this macro is run to configure the equipment in the room to use the source. Before this is done, everything's been turned on. The audio video devices, the video specific devices, and the source device. And it says, use this to configure signal routing on displays, receivers, matrix switchers, video over IP, preamps, anything with an input. This is where it switches. So I'm going to go to my command, and first, I'm going to select my AVR. Now under function, you're going to select the input for the receiver. Now this might be something you'd have to hunt for. So under main zone commands, there's a source select, input source. That's the guy I'm looking for. Now it'll default to the first item in the table. I'm going to select SAT cable. Okay, now before we continue on, there's still something else we need to switch, the TV. And even though the TV is going to be stuck on HDMI 1, I still want to enforce it to switch. That way, if the client switches it off of HDMI 1 accidentally, it doesn't trigger a service call. So let's bring in a command. Let's select the TV. From the dropdown, let's select the IR emulated source commands, and let's leave it on HDMI 1. Now, sometimes when you're using driver commands, it's a good idea to put a little time delay in between each of these commands to allow the driver to process these commands without overrunning anything. Sometimes it's not necessary, sometimes it might be, so I always just put a 0.3 of a second delay. Okay? Now the next command, activity ready, is used to finally jump to the satellite page. Fortunately, these will always be programmed for you, regardless of whether you added a page or not when you added a device. And what this says is jump to the satellite media room to the first page, whatever controller is calling it. Okay? So you want to make sure pages are there to jump to. Otherwise, it won't do anything. Okay? And those are always going to be programmed for you, which is why we didn't program the other source types. Let me recap these selection events. When you walk up to the controller, pick it up and the room is off, and press Watch DirecTV. This is what happens. The first thing, the controller jumps to a Please Wait page. And while it's on the Please Wait page, Room On runs, turning on anything that both audio and video share, like a receiver. So the receiver turns on, waits 1.5 seconds before moving on to video on. Video on turns on only video-specific equipment, mostly displays, even a receiver if it's only used for video. Anything that's just used for video, okay? So this only turns on the TV. Then it waits 3 seconds before turning on the underlying source device. It'll skip over this if the device is already on, but like I said, the room is off. And then it will switch inputs with the activity selected, and then finally jump to the page for that activity. Beautiful. Now, before moving on to the next activity, what about when the room turns off? We have to program a deselection events, starting with the room off start. And these have those yellow stickies also. And these are going to tell you those 3 pieces of information: when it runs, what it's used for, and how often you need to program it. And this one is also used for a please wait page, but it's going to run at the beginning whenever the room off command's set. And it's common to all activities in the room. Program it once, you're done. So instead of bringing in another page link, I'm going to do it the quick way. I'm going to go up to Activity Start, click just to the left of it. As you can see, my cursor is blinking right there. And I'm going to select the copy function in the tag editor toolbar. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to room off start, and I'm going to click the paste function, and that'll insert the clipboard contents, which is the please wait page. Save me some time and some typing and clicking. Okay. Now, what about activity deselected? This is one of those here if you need me kind of things, but you're not going to use me often. Okay. The reason being is this one's not only going to run when you turn off the room, but it's also going to run when you switch to another source. And it says you'll rarely need to do anything for this step. Okay. Why would I use this? Well, I do use it in my own home. And the only reason why I use it is to purposely pause my Kaleidoscape when I'm watching a movie when I switch over to my cable box to get a sports score. It'll automatically pause the movie in case I forget. Okay. Of course, it will pause the movie also before it turns off the system, but that's also done too. So it says you really need to do anything for this step, so I'm skipping it. Now, power off source. This macro is run after no rooms are using the source. When the last room turns off the DirecTV, the last room in this case is only the media room, power off the device for the DirecTV. So this is where you turn off the DirecTV. So I'm going to go to my power on source. I'm going to click to the left, which will start blinking that cursor. Click copy, go to the power off source, click paste, and now I can set this to off. And that will turn off my DirecTV as long as I'm the last person using it. Okay? Which I'm always going to be because there's only one controller. All right. What about video off? Now, this one's really important to pay attention to because when this runs has to be understood. This is going to run when a video source is no longer in use, either because you selected audio source, meaning the Sonos, or because the room was turned off. Okay? It says use this to turn off power to any equipment that video on turned on. So really what this is used for is for the TV to turn off. But what if I don't want to turn off the TV when I select an audio source? Well, there's a provision for it. It says if you don't want the video to turn off when switching to an audio source, leave this empty and put the TV off or video off in the room off macro, which is next. Okay? So if you don't want your TV to turn off when you select the listen to Sonos, you won't turn off your TV and video off. You'll turn it off in room off, in addition to the receiver. But if you do want your your TV to turn off, this is where you do it. So I'm going to select video on. I'm going to copy it, paste it into video off, and set my TV off. Just be aware, if you do it in the video off, it will turn off when you select your audio devices or device as well. Okay? But I'm fine with that. Okay? Now, room off is going to be the opposite of room on. Okay? Turns off video and audio devices. Now, if I didn't want video off to run here for my TV, I would copy this, cut this, and paste it into room off along with the receiver. But typically, this is just going to be the opposite of room on. Okay? I'm going to copy my receiver, paste it into the room off, and turn off the receiver. Now, the controller is going to want to get back to its original starting page, kind of like when you're done with a website and you're ready to use it next time, it starts back at the home page. Well, Room Off Complete is no different. This is programmed for you to automatically jump back to the home page, whether you're a global multi-room controller or you're a local room controller, and it will make sure that the activity menus are exposed. Let me show you what I mean. Typically, when you're ready to turn off the system, let's say you're watching cable, and now you hit the power off function, which jumps to the power menu. So this is going to now jump to the power menu, and you're going to turn off the AV. If you wanted to just, when it turns off the AV, it's going to run all the deselection events using this special command here, room off current room. Okay? However, the controller is going to stay here if you don't have room off complete. So what room off complete will do is return the controller back to the home page and make sure the activities are exposed. Okay? And I'll leave that as is. This is automatically going to be programmed for you. Room off complete, that is. Now, if you're programming a welcome page for your client, you can change these pages to where it jumps to start if you want. Okay? But I'm going to leave it on like this because it works perfectly. All right, so let's go on to our next video macro now. And let's look at all the joy in programming centralized activities that don't need to be programmed over and over again. Activity start, it already knows how to do that. Room on, check. Video off, done. What about power on source? Technically, that needs to be done from source to source, but my Roku doesn't need to be turned on, so I could skip it. What about activity selected? Okay, so I do have to switch the Roku. What I like to do is head back to my last activity, select activity selected where I did my last input switching, and I want to copy this entire macro. How do I do that? Well, instead of just clicking copy, I hold down the Shift key, and that copies the entire macro and puts it on the clipboard. And now when I go to my next macro, Roku, and click activity selected and click paste, it copies both. Now I do need to set this to the Roku input. That is media player, if I have one. Let's see if I have a media player. Yep, I do. And we'll leave it TV on HDMI 1. The AVR will do the switching. What about activity ready? Done. Never have to program it. Okay, so what about when I turn off the room? Room off start? Done. Activity selected? Rarely used. Power off source? Well, the Roku doesn't have a power on and off. Technically it does, but it's really for the Roku TV. You don't really have to turn off your Roku. It'll be on a screensaver unless the client forgets to stop the streaming and turns off the rest of the system. So what you could do as a safeguard for power off source, instead of turning off the Roku, is use a special command to bring the Roku back to its homepage. That way it's not stuck streaming Netflix all night while the rest of the system's off. Select your Roku, and I'm going to select the function under keys. Keys refers to the keys on the remote control. And you have all these keys. I'm going to leave it on home. Home will jump home on the Roku, so I'm not stuck streaming. Video off, done. Room off, done. Room off complete, done. So it gets real easy. Let's skip over the Blu-ray and go to Sonos, because that's a different source type. That's an audio source type. And audio source types don't have a video on and video off. Instead, they have an audio on and audio off. I'll explain. Activity start will jump to the please wait page, just like every other activity. Room on will turn on video and audio specific devices. So our receiver's on. Perfect. What about audio on? What does audio on do? Well, it doesn't turn on the source. That's for power on source. But what it will turn on is audio distribution amps, maybe the particular zone on an audio distribution device, if you're using that also. Anything that's audio related other than the receiver, which has already been turned on with the room on. Since I don't have to turn on anything, I'm skipping it. What about power on source? Well, Sonos players don't have an on and off, so I'm going to skip it. What about activity selected? Well, I don't want to paste that Switching again because I don't need the TV part of it. So I'm just going to go to my command, select my AVR like I did originally. And under the function, I'm going to select source select input source. And I'm going to go for, let's do CD for that selection. And that's my Sonos input. I don't need a TV input. Activity ready is going to be done, which was jump to Sonos. Now, what about when we turn off the room? Room off start is finished, done. Activity deselected, rarely used. I'm there if you need me. Power off source. Sonos doesn't have an off, but let's prevent the client from streaming it all night. Let's bring in a pause command as a workaround. Select your Sonos. For your function, I'm going to go with the transport, pause function, and then just select your Sonos. You might have a bunch. We only have one. That way, instead of turning it off, it pauses it, so you don't leave it streaming all night, streaming Spotify, while the receiver and the TV are off, okay? What about audio off? Well, that's to turn off the zones on your audio distribution device, your 8810, your 8046, whatever audio distribution device you're using out there, okay? We don't have one, so we don't need it. And room off will turn off our receiver. And room off complete is already done, and we'll send the controller to its default starting page. So the client's ready next time he picks up the remote. Now, what about other source types like climate, home, and weather? Okay? These are only going to have two selection events. Activity selected, which does the input switching. I've never used that feature. If you do, please let me know, because I never had any chance to use it. I never had to. But it does have activity ready, which will jump to that page. So we never have to worry about programming other source types. They're always going to be programmed for us, just like the weather as well. That will jump to the weather page every single time. And on the deselection events, it does have the deselected in case you go from weather to something else and you want to do something. Okay? And that's optional. Remember, it also runs when you turn the system off also. So keep that in mind. Just read the sticky and get comfortable. And that's System Manager. Activities, at least. So let's recap. We configured our activities. We configured whether or not it's an activity, what type of source it is. Video, audio, and other. We configured the name of the source and the source order. Those are good for list menus, but great to do in case you add a list menu later. You don't have to come back to this. And then finally, we pulled this macro window up and we programmed our selection events and deselection events. Now we're ready to go back to our controller in the media room and tell it where to get these activities from. They're all centralized, but we still need to tell the remote where to locate the activity. We're going to do that next. Before we continue on, I just want to recap how we got here. I want to recap the order of operations. The first thing we did was, in the add workspace item, was add a main processor. Then we added the rooms, controllers, and source devices to the workspace. And we can see that source devices come in lots of different protocols and communication methods. Okay? Then after we did that, we closed the add workspace item and surveyed the workspace. We expanded it to make sure we can see everything and nothing is hiding. We went and renamed anything that had to be renamed. You can't move things from one area to the other, but you can delete it and re-add it pretty easily. And then we went and we programmed the overall project properties. We call that the system properties. Then we programmed the workspace properties. Everything in the workspace that requires updating properties. The main processor, drivers, and any controllers. And we went and did that. And then we went and programmed and we configured and programmed System Manager activities. We clicked on the first room in the project, and then we clicked on Activities. And then in the Activity menu, we configured our activities. We enabled what needed to be enabled. We configured the source type. Okay? The next two fields, purely informational, just tells you where the room in the source is located. And then we configured the activity name and sort order for list menu devices. Now, if we get a list menu later, we don't have to come back here and make edits. We're automatically done. Then we were ready to program our activities. And we programmed our activities using selection events and deselection events. And because these macros are centralized, using selection events and deselection events have several benefits. One of which, it makes macro programming a lot easier, especially for beginners. Number two, a lot of these only run when they need to run. Okay? If the system is already on, it's not going to run some of these. Another great reason why we use these is because you don't have to program the same commands that are repetitious from device to device over and over again. Okay? So it's a more efficient way of programming, and it's an easier way for us to organize our programming. Okay? Then after we finish programming our macros, we're now ready to configure the home page on our controllers that are using button menus. If they're using list menus, they're already done. But let's look at a typical button menu. Now to do this, I'm going to click under the media room, under sources, the home source. Okay? And under the home source, I want you to think of this like a shelf. Under the home source, here are the pages assigned to that shelf. They're on that shelf. There's a regular home page and a power menu. Okay? The link to the power menu has already been programmed on the hard button. Okay? We'll get to that in a little bit. But first, I want you to focus on the user interface. Now, if you want to make the user interface bigger or smaller, click this zoom ratio here. Right now it's set to 57%, and then use the slider to zoom in or out. So get it to be the perfect measurement for your screen. I'm going to pull my macro window down since I'm not programming right now. Okay, now we're ready to tell the software how to run those centralized macros. But first, we have to program the buttons that the software gave us by creating our own buttons using different text and different icons. Some of these might even match some of the activities we need, but we'll redo these, okay? Now, if you see this grayed out portion, that means that this is on a viewport, okay? Now, the first thing you always want to do on any interface is make sure the layer for that viewport is unlocked. If you go to click something and you can't click it, that means this layer is locked. If you're not sure what's on that layer, click the hide and unhide button, okay? You want to make sure that layer is unlocked and selected. And now you want to right click and select Edit Viewport. Now, what is a viewport? A viewport is an area of the screen that can scroll horizontally or vertically and have endless frames of devices or channel favorites or presets or scenes, anything you want. And you can advance the frame by advancing the frame up here. We only have one frame, but if we have more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 activities, we would advance the frame and create them on the second frame. Then the client can use gesture control to flip between the frames. Okay? So what we're going to do is do what this software says. Viewport, right-click to edit. Right-click, edit viewport, and now we're going to customize these buttons for our activities. Now, we don't need to do the home page because we already have a hard button that will do it, but we still need to tell that home button where to use the activity, okay? So what we're going to do first is customize our menu buttons here, okay? That means changing the text and changing the icon. So I'm going to right-click on the Apple TV and select Edit Text, okay? Now, there's been some spacing used here, so if you want to preserve the spacing, you want to leave that as is and just kind of hover over just the Apple TV portion. That will preserve the left alignment spacing. Click the backspace function, and let's call this Watch DirecTV or Watch Satellite. And let's see how this looks. All right, that looks fine. Now be careful. If you don't preserve the spacing, what will wind up happening is that your command will look like this. So I will adjust the spacing again manually. That's good enough for me. Okay. Now on the next one, edit text, just hover over the text portion, preserving that left spacing, and we'll call this Watch Roku. Okay. All right. Beautiful. The next one, will be watch Blu-ray. Then listen to Sonos or listen to music, we decided. And then we have a couple of global shared sources we want to access. First, it's the control climate. And then second, we have just enough. It is the view weather. Okay, now let's say we had another bunch of activities, which might very well might be. Maybe we have 8 or 10 or 12. What you'll do is you'll copy these, hold down the Shift key while you select each option, then right-click Copy, advance the frame, and then right-click Paste, and then just change these to the activities you need. I'm not going to do that, but that's what you would do. Now that we've created the text for these activities, let's create the icon. I'm going to go to the Bitmap tab in the tab menu in the lower right side. Okay, I'm going to expand this a little bit more using those frame handles. And under Libraries, I'm going to select Coral Icons. Okay, and I'm going to use the search box to search for my icons. First, I'll search for DirecTV. That looks good. I'll bring that in. Okay, what about Roku? Search for Roku. Bring it in. What about Blu-ray? That's good enough. Music? Let's look for a Sonos icon. Okay, or we could even look for a music icon. It depends on your client. If your client doesn't know what Sonos is, something like that might be a little easier for them to understand, and people that visit especially. What about climate? Yeah, we got that little thermostat. That's fine. And finally, weather. Great! Now that we've done adding our activities, and you could blow these away and use your own buttons if you like, but we use the can buttons. It's fine. Now that we're done with the buttons, let's tell the software where to find those activities here in System Manager under Activities. Okay? How do we do that? Well, we're going to right-click Edit the viewport, and now we're going to go to the Tag Browser. What happened was when we created these source devices, when we added them to our project file, the software created special activity tags, also known as labels. These labels can be dragged and dropped to the buttons. Notice there's an M next to the activity tag. What that means is that tag contains a macro, in this case, a special routine that tells the activity where to find the centralized activity in System Manager. So you're just going to drag and drop the activities to the applicable buttons. I'm going to take my Blu-ray and drag it to the Blu-ray. Then I'm going to drag my home button, drag it to my hard button. Okay? Drag my Roku button to the Roku. And then just keep going on and on. The ones that you've dragged over already will have green and be check marked. Satellite, Sonos, weather, and climate. Okay? And that's it. That's all you have to do. Now let's take a look at the underlying command. I'll pull up the macro window to show you. There's a special command that says select the activity in the media room, satellite media room. What that's saying is run this. Start running the deselection events. Okay? And that's how you program your buttons. And now you have a viewport in case you add more activities later. The client can scroll without navigating away from the rest of the interface. And that's the introductory single room system in Integration Designer. Now there's some other skills you need to obtain. You still need to learn how to access some interface design essentials, navigating the workspace, how to select pages versus other things. You have to master tags and macro levels and variable levels, learn how to program two-way feedback, and also program beyond the basics. In order to do so, head over to our webpage, and on our webpage, on our dealer site, select Resources, Training Information, and scroll down to Certified Expert Level Training. Click on Integration Designer 11 Video Series. There's no need to complete courses 1 through 4 or 8 or 9 through 11. Just complete 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that will give you the essential tools you need to program any kind of one-way or one single room system. If you have any questions, let us know. That should be enough detail for you to get going. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.